Jenkins, we're continuing with this interview with a new cassette. You were commenting on the kinds of men you knew as miners. You felt they were the salt of the earth. And there are still factors, I believe you were saying in your opinion, that haven't altered even though the work conditions have, because probably factory work is more monotonous by contrast than ever today, and more...
I agree.
You're doing the same thing. Charlie Chaplin's grotesque, twisting of one bolt.
Yes.
And a miner, after all, is his work. I watched that long wall thing.
Yes.
Those men are doing every kind of variety of mechanical work. They're under cramped conditions. It's a small, you can imagine if it's a 4-foot seam, they're very often caught up in about 2.5 feet between the two tops.
Exactly. They got to be vigilant all the time.
All right.
And it's less monotonous, though it's not as interesting as the old-fashioned mining, I don't think, for the young man.
I think you're right.
And this is typical of introducing mechanization, isn't it?
One thing Bill Jones said I couldn't compare with the United States, but I'd like your observation. He was, as I find many older men agree on this thesis, of why that the sociologists who claim that coal miners are only in mining because they have no other choice of occupation, that I think these men are wrong, that miners are increasingly getting a choice of occupation and still prefer mining.
Yes.
But Bill Jones added another thing. He said, here in our country, the miner watching a layoff at Ford or some private industry today has a new reason. He's an employee of the National Coal Board, and there's much less chance that they can come along and lay off a whole, end his career as quickly as a foreign-owned company might or something. And I didn't know whether that was accurate or just a rank-and-file kind of reaction.
Yeah, this can work both ways. You see, if a man is dismissed now from any collar in the National Coal Board, there's probably very good reason, and it's done with the union's knowledge.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be very difficult for that man to work in another pit. Whereas, under the various different colliery companies, he could in the old days.
Yeah, right.
Just from that point of view. But I think the miner today, or rather the parents, would probably have more influence on the young lad today to persuade him not to go into mining.
That's true in our country too.
You see?
Yes.
Because of the hazards.
Yes, that's true today.
And in my young days, there were no other occupations.
Who then do you think the young men are in mining today? Even though I know you're not as close to it, you still have the wisdom of your youth.
Well, I meet people, and I've asked on several occasions, training officers, what type of guy do you get in today? And they get a mixed bag. The Coal Board has introduced, and they've been pioneers in introducing training schemes. They train the miners to be mechanics.
Has the union cooperated in this?
Yes, the union are with them in this. But it's a dangerous thing to do from the point of view of wanting to keep the boy there, because it gives him...
He's now a mechanic or an electrician.
And very often the Coal Board has trained the man well for another industry, maybe private industry.
Yes, right.
I don't know what the figures are nowadays for the number of boys who leave coal mining after training.
Yeah.
I should think it's higher than they want it to be.
Yes. In our country, there may be a factor that's not identical here. There's an additional reason. That there is no other industry, I think you could say, without long apprenticeship or some comparable time-consuming thing in which a worker, a blue-collar worker, could more quickly achieve a high daily rate of wages as he can at the face in coal mining?
Well, coal mining was nearly the top of the list in remuneration for the ordinary working man. But with the introduction of these motor car industries,
Yeah, it's changing.
it's changing a good deal. And even now, I think they're well down what they used to be.
In our country, it takes the construction trades or something like that to make higher money, brickman, some particular electrician on construction trades. Other than that, with a scale of close to $50 a day, coal miners, are not they may act like poor men, just like in your day, in their folk life, but they essentially are men that are better off.
Yes, I would say today in coal mining, the noise upsets them as much as anything today. And you see, you've taken away the variety of jobs, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
And what is the saying? Variety is the staff of life, you see.
Mm-hmm.
A miner in the old days would come in, he'd have several things, tasks to do, and he would judge when he would do them.
Yes.
It was
He was an
free
entrepreneur.
enterprise within a free
Yes,
enterprise,
it was.
you see. And this is important for the Sikh of man, that he is a kind of a master of what he does.
Yes.
Now, I'm working now, I'm 70 years of age, I will be very soon, because I do it in my own way. I've always, since I left coal mining, or even when I was in coal mining, I was always able to do the things I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to, when I was in the pits, I wanted to go to night school.
Mm-hmm.
I was, examinations never presented any problem with me, you see. And therefore I went from one step to the other. But I went into coal mining as a young man, voluntarily looking forward to it. I was never conscious of these dangers that people talk about.
Do you think some of the young men who enter coal mining today do so over manhood type reasons, machismo and the...
Less, I should say.
In other words, they know that a lot of fancy, educated people are simply afraid to go into combat or to go into a coal mine. There's a certain manhood pride.
Yes, there's that. It's very hard to realize which way they think. You see, it's in one sense it's because they couldn't get a job anywhere else.
True.
They're affected what their pals do.
Right.
If he got a couple of pals and then they coal mining, he wants to be with them. That's his prime reason.
Right.
It depends also what the parents, whether he wants to live with his parents. Usually, the collier hasn't got far to travel to work.
Right.
Those exceptions.
Yes.
There are exceptions.
You're not getting as much commuting as we are now. In other words, a common situation, as you'll see and be able to criticize and comment on these reprints, is that some of our men drive 50 and 70 miles one way to a coal mine.
Yes.
I studied the new officers of one new local union came from 4 different counties.
Yes.
This is great mobility,
Yes.
which means those men...
In their own cars.
Yes, very often, sometimes in carpools, but very often in their own cars. No, our public transportation is as close to zero, at the mines as it could be. Another factor, sometimes, affecting this in addition to the transportation is the fact that they now live, let us say, in a middle-class suburb of Cardiff, but travel to Pontypridd, that type of thing. You're not having that, I don't think, comparable development here.
How does the miners' remuneration compare with car workers in the States?
Well, the effect of an industrial union's equalization on mechanics, electricians, and similar tradesmen is somewhat along the lines of your earlier comments. That man, in many cases, if he chooses to, can go out and make more per hour. You know, if he's really close to being an old-time blacksmith or metal worker, or especially an electrician now, than he can in the mines. But he's at the top. But he's at the top along with a continuous miner operator and the other key men at the face. And they're all at about $50 a day now. Now that puts them somewhat above blue-collar workers generally, with the exception that the face workers have no comparable. They have no skills to take anywhere else. You know, what could they be except laborers in any other industry?
Yes, that's so. This is yours.
But when you get to the trades, they're a bit aggravated by this equalization. You know, because they think they maybe ought to be making closer to $8 or $10 an hour to go underground. You know, they make and there's something to that. You know.
Yes, I'm sure you're right. It's very. You see, another thing is happening. The tempo's changing. Now, in my young days, the situation was fairly stable. We were poor comparatively. Today, there's more affluence and more rapid change, and this is creating a lot of uncertainty in people knowing what to do. They think it's important to get as much money as they can, and the jobs that provide this are the jobs thereafter. I think that some of the values are wrong nowadays. But we've got to understand we're in a rapidly changing situation. And this is why the young are revolting against the older people, because they think things are changing so rapidly, and what was good enough for the old people is not good enough for us.
I had, in one day, at your mine yesterday at Oakdale, I suddenly got the impression of a community, like the number of young men with their hair to their shoulders in the mine was like the increasing number of bearded or long-haired men in our own mines. And they're bound to have become part of national mores rather than where their fathers were in isolated communities.
Yeah,
you know?
I don't understand why they wear their hair so long. It's partly, I think, because the elders
don't like it.
secretly don't like it, and there's a kind of rebellion in it, but you are free to do what you like. It may be we're going back to the Georgian days, because in England, you know, it was customary to wear, and beards in the biblical times. Most people wore beards.
Yeah. Well, there's been some articles in our country. They had a number of articles just on face styles and long hair, which they showed the pattern of the rise of abolitionism, the anti-slavery movement, in which they moved from the powdered and wigged George Washington days to the full beards and the long hair.
Yeah.
And they seem to have some connection with political and social change, because then when all that was over and it moved back after the Civil War, they went back to shorter hair.
Well, I see sometimes on television they show these hippie communities in the States, in California, San Francisco, along the west coast there. And I often ask myself, they haven't got a national health service out there. They are, who pays these hippies?
Well,
the government. Does the government give them any money?
Well, yeah. Let me say this. Much of it, they have good middle-class parents who are supporting them. That's what a great deal of
I see.
This is also true of a great deal of the left revolutionary ferment in our country. Whereas in your country there is a class consciousness.
Yes.
And I'm told that 1, 2, or 3 of the officers say that I will meet or have met maybe, communists by reputation or membership. This is very unlikely in our trade union movement. It's much more likely that the son of a very wealthy person will be a left, revolutionary. Now, we may be seeing some change, like, for instance, the revolt in the miners' union in the United States does not have underlying it the educated rank and file that you have here. In other words, a real revolution has taken place. All of the previous associates of Lewis, and more recently of Boyle, who was more of a gangster type in the American movie and TV kind of media presentation, all of these experienced trade unionists, whatever you think of them, conservative or what, are out. And in their place, our rank and file is not who read, but more the type who shout and make noises. And some of them may be capable now of reaching mature leadership, but surrounding them are young, wealthy, revolutionary students. Now that isn't likely, I don't see that happening in your country. You follow me? As you have turmoil in the labor movement, you seem to have an experienced rank and file in the working class, that reads, or whether you agree with them or not, they have a stability of workers, These are erratic kind of middle-class kids who are advising these, and that's why we don't know what's going to happen. None of us know.
What would be in mining? Is there any sort of color bar in mining at all?
Oh no, we've been up and down with that. In Alabama, in the South, when I first came into the labor movement, the working force had in some past years been overwhelmingly black. Mining had been regarded as a slave-type industry. And it ran about 50-50. In some mines, 2/3 white. In other mines, 60% black. But with real lines, almost jurisprudence-type lines of seniority. The black man could never become the motorman. He could only become the man riding the rear of the motor. And then in World War II, with Roosevelt's leadership and national mores changing and men risking their lives, a lot of this began to break down. The first black men bid, and a federal board came in, and, there'd be a threat of race riots or something, and he would be allowed by seniority to move forward. So that what you had was this is the Deep South now, where blacks and whites did not even meet and where blacks did not vote, talking about late 1930s and 40s. In those unions, then, the black men at that time sat on one side of the hall, the whites on the other. The president was always white. Black man would never be nominated for that. No white man would ever be nominated for vice president, so that there was a complete mix of officers and an ability to hold together against the operators. Some of that is gone today, and a little bit of it still exists. In the area where, that's the Deep South, the worst prejudiced area. In all of the border area where I live, in West Virginia, which is called south of the Mason-Dixon line, technically, blacks are accepted pretty much. And they run from 0 in some mines to 20% in others. They're not a threatening force. See, in Alabama, when you're 50-50, it's much more threatening.
So you're keeping the numbers down?
Well, no, I think the companies would hire every black man who came along. They just don't, they exist in our area. They're 5%, 4% of the general population is black. It's a white mountain area, okay? Now, when I say a mine has 15% blacks, that's rather low. You follow me? The general population is 4%. But in some mines, it's hard to tell. We think it is operator, lower management prejudice. The black applicants don't find their way onto the rolls. and the union doesn't argue and say, how come there are no blacks, you know? A lot of it is a little like you have here, kinfolks. If one black guy gets in and he's good, he can bring his brother, he can bring his sons, you know, there's no problems. Everybody accepts it. There's fairly easygoing relationships. It's because there aren't the kind of percentage of blacks that are threatening, I think, is the basic reason.
Right.
And the union has taught them brotherhood.
Yes.
I must say, you know, I didn't emphasize it on the color line. After all, before you had blacks, you had Italians, then you had Slovaks, then you had the Irish. I mean, you went through every migration in which the operators split the men repeatedly.
Well, of course, the States is a mix, isn't it?
Yes.
Of all European countries, you
Yes.
could say. But each of these countries, you see, the Irish are very close. They're supporting Southern Ireland against Northern Ireland. By and large, aren't they, in the States?
Right.
Of course, you've got the
That's
other
right.
kind too. But they...
No, Irish Catholics were originally, you see, presented as much of a problem to the first Welsh and English miners in the Pennsylvania mines.
Sure.
So the Molly Maguires, you may have heard of, they had the secret organizations, and they had real problems. But I think the Union was repeatedly defeated with bloodshed, whereas your bloodshed is 150 years ago.
Yes.
Your riots and all.
Yes.
In
Oh
our
my
country,
gosh, we got it in Northern Ireland now. It's the most difficult. It's urban guerrilla warfare in a way,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
It's about difficult situations to contend with.
yes.
There you are.
But they've colored our coal miner situation more than any labor group in our country. In other words, violence in the mines continued right on up to 30 years ago. You took your life in your hands, say, to announce you were a union man in 1932, and that's just 40 years ago. So this affected all of the older men still alive, you follow me? They were under a police state system. They were locked in. There was barbed wire around each community like you would have here in South Wales. There were mining communities, row houses, wooden, and surrounded with men with guns and searchlights. It's no exaggeration to say that Mr. Lewis was revered almost like a god because he brought these men out of this condition.
I think I met him once when he came back to this country. You see, if I'm right here, in this country, you would say that 90% of the miners would be socialists. Some would be communists, but the bulk of them, and in any election, the Labour man, the leftist man would go in. But this is not true in the States, is it?
Oh, no.
It's because of your private enterprise, isn't it?
Yes, it's many factors. We don't understand them all. I don't think the left
But you were
people
supporting
understand.
Nixon this time, weren't you? A Republican.
Well, when you say a majority of the people did, and the
Leader,
Watergate
yeah.
scandal, it was a very large 60-40, majority. Although a 60% majority are registered Democratic in their party registration. There was more of a vote against McGovern, not on ideological grounds, perhaps in part, as much as the element of seemingly allowing the women's lib and the gay liberation and the student revolutionaries, that all these elements were like functioning. It would be as, in my comparison, you correct me if I'm way off, as if the Enoch Powell kind of objection, to immigration was much bigger, and alongside it he had 5, 6, or 7 other issues. He might not only sweep one place, it would be as if he could sweep the whole blue-collar contingent.
He has got a lot of support amongst the labouring.
Yes, and you can see now, I add several things to that, you follow me?
Yeah.
There was not just this color issue, you follow me? Nixon never had to come out anti-Negro. He was known, you follow me, to those who were prejudiced. On top of that, McGovern, in the TV, I warned the local Democratic Party people, I mean, it's ridiculous here. He's meeting with a shouting bunch of 5,000, youth, He's on national TV. He needs to act like a president. You follow me? You quiet down and I'll answer you. You know, like Nye Bevan might have. You follow me? Instead, you know, it's like he's a professor. You all want to speak. You know, he didn't give off a strong enough impression.
Yeah.
So that I felt he was a very gentle man, probably the most honest senator.
Well, is there any truth in this Waterton? Is it Waterton they call it?
Watergate.
Watergate business. That the Republicans wanted to knock McCluskey out.
Yeah, I think they did.
And they didn't mind McGovern going in?
No, there was a clear feeling on the part of people like myself who were, you know, who have generally been Democratic. You follow me?
Yeah.
That the chances of winning it was a pleasant thought, but it wasn't going to put together a majority. First of all, the labor leaders from Meany all the way through were disaffected with McGovern. This was very dangerous. They didn't like him. They announced it in advance.
Well, he appeared to me as a kindly, fair-minded man.
He was all of that. He was all of that. But he did not build what in the States has always been a coalition. In other words, it is necessary for a Democrat to win to not lose the labor vote. He proceeded just as if it was enough to have the women who wanted women's rights, the students, the academics, you know, the liberals. And to my mind, in a working class community like West Virginia is a big coal mine area, I just saw disaster here. The blue collar workers were feeling he don't give a goddamn about us. You follow me? And yet we carried the county I live in for McGovern. You follow me? That did, but this county should have gone overwhelmingly, but it didn't. It was like 14,000 to 12,000. When we had 22,000 Democrats. You see, it was not enough to make it. He was a kindly man. He was the son of a Methodist minister. He was truthful. He was the opposite of the Watergate scandal. You know, he would not have allowed anything like this to happen.
He made a mistake in choosing this man with a psychological history.
Yeah, even these little things added up. It was as if he can't even pick a good vice president and know his medical history, then he's going to make serious mistakes.
Because the average person is now getting very suspicious of seeing these men on the television. And there are few people now who can hold an audience. There is one man in this country who's really got what we call charisma.
Who is that?
Enoch Powell.
Yeah.
On the television.
Enoch Powell?
Even men.
Yeah, I saw him. You know, he spoke to our group in London.
Did he? Oh,
I went up afterwards and told him, you know, Mr. Powell, you're portrayed on our TV and in our press as a right-wing conservative of very extreme views, a racist, so forth. That's the way, you know, you come over. I said, and seeing you talking on the health issues, you're unlike our right-wing conservatives because you appear rational. You know, you appear He said, well, it's not my fault that your media portrays me this way. He said, I thank you for the compliment, but he said, you know, I deal with the issues, and they single me out on the immigration issue as the one issue that I stand for. Because on health care, I found him talking a bit. I didn't agree with him, but he wasn't a wild man.
The doctors used to tell me that he was the best health minister they ever had.
Yeah, well.
That he broke this drug racket too. He brought. I think that what comes out is his integrity that comes out.
Yeah.
And he says things, you see. He's different from most politicians. He does. Yeah. I think he does believe what he says.
Yeah, right. You see, Goldwater's a little bit this way. Yeah. Goldwater's a real right-wing conservative. Yeah. But when Watergate was breaking, about a month ago, I told my wife...
They portrayed him over here.
Did they show him? Yeah, but I'm talking about just a month ago, before all the Watergate was clear, you know, as a bell of how crooked Nixon is. Because we couldn't hardly believe how bad it was going to smell. All of a sudden, one night, Goldwater appeared on the TV. First time he's made the news in a long time. He said, I want to serve notice on the White House. First time saying that. That I have supported Republican candidates for president, for Senate, and for Congress. And Mr. Nixon better determine that he's coming clean and coming clean quickly, because some of us must run for office next year. You know, it was like a threat from the right that I have secret information. No one knew anything yet. You see, it was like before all these headlines.
To be as kind as we can to Nixon now, I don't follow this up, but I got this impression that there was one thing in Nixon's mind for the last year or so, and that is to solve by hook or by crook this Vietnam business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And being kind now, is it possible that his occupation
With that.
and preoccupation with Vietnam prevented him from dealing with things that we say now he should have?
Yeah, it's possible. It's occurred to me. The thing that I find unbelievable, I think the thing most offensive to me is that although I supported Lyndon Johnson, I did so with a clear knowledge that he was a wheeler dealer, that he was a man who would twist an arm and he would take another man's arm and put it in his pocket and say, this means I own you. He was a crude man. He ran a coalition very crudely. Nixon came on. He was a religious man on the surface. Billy Graham in the White House every Sunday preaching. Law and order was his slogan with Mitchell as Attorney General. The hypocrisy is the worst thing that's offensive to me, because certainly Haldeman and Ehrlichman were his alter egos. They could not, in my mind, have dared do this whole thing without clearing the substance of it.
In other words, he was such a strong man, they wouldn't dare take the risk.
I don't believe it. No, he was a politician extraordinary, and they've both been with him for 18 or 20 years from the depths.
Yeah, but you are different from us, you see, that all our officials, they've got to be an MP. These men... These men came up in the shadows of Nixon. Exactly.
We had no scrutiny. We do not know whether they could have police raids.
So this is what's going to come out of this. You're going to alter your system of selection.
Yes.
They've got to be people who have
faced scrutiny.
Been elected.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Looks to me.
This may help us more than anything to get a strong congressional system.
Look, it's always good to come out of it. You'll be better off.
Okay. This is what I need, to be cheered up.
You will be better off. Look what's happening in this country. It's taking the heat off and that is the lawn thing.
Yeah, you appear to be having a small scandal of a sort. Not on our size, do you? You don't go in for our size. One last thing, and then I'll get out of your way. Would you repeat what you said to me earlier? Your reaction to the Alexander Michael Johns series of 3 articles about 10 years ago on the history of pneumoconiosis, what you felt were its weaknesses.
He was an archivist. I think that, for instance now, and many people have said this, even Professor Goff has said, blaming Halding because they took up his papers about saying that it wasn't due to coldness. I don't think they've been quite fair to Halding.
Because he did die in 36.
He died in 36 before the full impact of the coal dust came about.
Yes.
See? And they've got to base their opinion of a man on the knowledge then available. You see. Why the impact of coal dust was on me is from I was, as a doctor, I suppose, I was in a better position to take what I call a detailed industrial history. This is the weakness of medical men, is taking what we call a detailing
Right.
working history.
Yeah.
Now I was able, if I would ask, and I spent a lot of time taking men's industrial history when I was with the MRC, you're going to be able to sort out, you're going to say, you're going to find out how hard you work, what conditions were. Well, I could always picture it, you see.
Why could you not, and perhaps you do in this country, we are considering a project of using only ex-coal miners of experience, extensive experience, to be trained to take the industrial history. Do you do that now here?
Well, it's not, nowadays, you see, I don't suppose it's so necessary because there's not so much variation. They'll be either working in the coal face, and now you've got the dust conditions probably portrayed in those coal faces. But when I was dealing with a situation, there were no dust records at all.
Right.
I had to make an assessment
Right.
of that man's exposure.
Back on Michael John, did you feel that he dealt enough with the industry as the background for the disease?
Not for coal mining, no. He did it in general terms, and he referred to reports. He tried to, I must be quite fair to him, it's quite a good series.
It is, yes, it's the only...
But
Yeah.
I got special knowledge, you see, which
I
is
realize
in,
that, yeah.
of the coal mining industry. I think these are the phases of it, but what they don't do this, you see.
Yeah.
They don't regard this dust disease in mining. There were three types. There was pure silicosis, there was secondary silicatosis, and there was the coal miners, the dominant.
Yeah. Right.
Hello.
No, we're finishing now.
5 minutes more. I'll have a drink before we
Okay.
go. And that each of these diseases had a simple form and a complicated form. You see?
Yeah.
And they were occurring with different emphasis at different times. Now, this is what they should make clear at the beginning when you're looking at anybody's contribution to pneumoconiosis.
Yeah.
You must state the facts as we know them now, and perhaps preamble say how they used to vary. Then look at what these fellows had written in the light of that. You see.
Right.
This is the difficulty all along the line. That sometimes somebody would be talking about advanced pneumoconiosis infection, and another time they'd be comparing that with another situation where you had a simple pneumoconiosis.
Right.
And we've got these three different dust. The other thing about the dust, this is the important thing about the dust. Silica and silicates are about 4 to 5 times as radiopaque as coal. See? What does that mean? It means that you can inhale quarter amount of rock dust to produce the same opacity in the lung as coal dust. And you may get a fella who's been exposed at one time to coal dust as such, and he developed this rather fluffy pattern in the lungs. And then for a short while, he'd be going engage in rock mining. You see?
Yes.
We had instances in the mines where the medical research contributed showed this fella had seemed to progress more, what's called young progressors. But when we went into industrial history, we found that these men had been exposed for 2-3 years to a lot of rock dust.
We have this mix in our country to a great extent.
If you want to understand the problem, the industrial history is very important.
That's very
If you get a complicated situation, you must be able to appraise the industrial. Not to say that every man you see, they push the X-rays up, that he's got the same industrial history, and just categorize him that way. You see?
Right.
And this is the...
Are you familiar with the George Rosen history of miners' disease?
I've seen his paper
It's
somewhere.
a book. It's a full book on some title like the history of miners'
Does he
diseases.
deal with the coal, metal mining?
It's all, yes, it's all
right,
mining with a great deal on the early Scottish stuff that Michael John deals with. Very extensive chapters on that, and it begins way back in prehistoric and historic times, so it mixes metal and coal mining.
Yeah.
And is no effort to it deals with every kind of disease that mining people got.
Now, these advanced cases which appeared in literature were due to infection, you see. They would, in addition, have a lot of rock dust
Yes.
with them and some coal dust all mixed up. Well, that's quite a different thing from this coal miners thing we're having in South Wales, you see. This is what you always got to be very careful when you're looking at the incidence of that particular place. Now, is this more 90% coal dust, or is it the secondary silicates, or is it rarely, as it will be rarely now, silica, free silica?
Right.
Industrial history is important. It's been neglected, I'm afraid.
I agree.
Because they got the X-ray, and he's been working underground.
That's right. Now, you got the gold medal from the Institute of South Wales Institute of Engineering, and I wish you would describe to me the very fine-looking miner's lamp, safety lamp, in your living room.
Well, the
that
one
was presented to you.
On leaving the National Coal Board, the miners' leaders, I think, wanted to pay some sort of tribute to me, and invited me to a dinner at the Park Hotel, where I was presented with this lamp.
That was at the end of 1966.
As a gesture of my presumed work with the miners' union.
Right.
Then I later kept on for a few years as a member and chairman of Tallygarn Rehabilitation Centre.
Where is that located, Tallygarn?
That's at Pontyclean. It's about 12 miles from Cardiff.
And that's an important rehabilitation centre.
It's a very advanced, progressive rehabilitation centres of injuries, in respect of injuries, and it's sponsored and supported all along the line by the Miners' Union. They were the prime movers in it, and they still are. The only thing now is that with the decline of the mining industry, there are insufficient miners available to come.
Does the National Health Service support those
It's
services there?
Oh yes, it's been included in the National Health Service.
Right.
But it's been allowed to retain its representations from management and men.
You're like Dr. Goff. Since your retirement, you've stayed a very busy man.
Very busy indeed.
Give me an idea of the kind of consultation work that you do or services that you perform.
Well, at the present moment, I'm doing all kinds of work. I'm doing medical boards for sickness to
industrial injuries,
opinion on medical cases as the man's fitness for work. Also, I'm on the industrial injuries board where we make an assessment of the disability due to injuries. I also became a member of the pneumoconiosis medical panel. I did some years of that, and I do also one interesting aspect of the work now are these attendance cases we've got.
Attendance?
Yeah. People apply for constant attendance. These are people who are very disabled, and under the Department of Health and Social Security, they are a lot of money given to support these or enable them to get additional attention for hemiplegias, paralysis one side. Some of the people are in really a bad way, bad hearts, bad chests, and hemiplegias. Now these people are entitled, well, I often visit some of these people and make a report. So my work really is more clinical now, and much more varied than it was when I was a medical administrator. But throughout the whole of my career, I've always had time to do medical examinations. I've avoided getting into the rut of being
Administrator.
100% administrator.
That's fine. You seem to be enjoying all.
Yes, I enjoyed it, and it's remunerative. We don't want the money anymore.
Right. You seem to be enjoying life. You have a fine home and
I
a big
think
Irish wolfhound.
Yes, I don't think that after you working hard all your life, as I started to work at 14, that you could suddenly shut up at 65 years of age and expect to be happy doing nothing.
Well, you planned well.
And my wife, she's got interest, and we both get on very well together, you know.
I thank you for all of your time. You've been a most gracious,
Well, you must
kindly
come
person.
back here again, and now shall we go and have a drink before you go?
Well,
You can have a choice. I think
Okay.
I've got a choice.
we're meeting in the offices of the South Wales, is it Miners Federation?
South Wales Miners Union.
Miners Union, which is an independent entity, but an area of the National Union of Mine Workers as well, in the AEU building in Pontypridd, Glamorgan, Wales. I'm in the offices of Mr. D.C. Davis, and would you tell me, Mr. Davis, the title you hold with the South Wales Miners?
Yep. I'm the head of the compensation department of the South Wales area of the National Union of Mine Workers.
All right. And Mr. Emmeline Williams, who is Vice President of the South Wales Miners, is going to be with us and has stepped out for a moment and may join us, and his voice will be heard later. His position is an elective one. May I ask whether yours is as well, or how you operate?
Mine's appointed.
Yours is appointed one. And who has the appointing power?
The Executive Council of the South Wales Miners. Now, the Executive Council is a lay council. It's a council of men who work in the pit, and they sit periodically in this office, and all mundane matters are dealt with them. One of those duties is to appoint officers such as myself.
Who else is appointed? Because this is a kind of democracy we don't have at the moment throughout the
It's only
United
specialized jobs that are appointed. They are appointed because men who have no experience in these particular fields are not eligible to try for them. We try to form a policy and appoint the best men who have experience in the particular field in mind. So among other appointments, I am appointed, as I've already told you. Our finance department, they are appointed because of course they are people experienced in financial matters. Our safety department are appointed people because they specialize in safety. Our president, secretary and vice president are elected, and they are drawn from all members who work in the pit. They must have experience in the pit and be members of the union, of course.
Mr. Davis, would you be good enough, before you tell me of the kind of problems that I want to hear about, to tell me your own experience that when were you appointed in compensation, and what your previous experience was?
Well, no, I spent 31 years working down the pit myself. I became elected, first of all, as an executive council member, and this is elected, not appointed, of course, as a layman, to the executive council. At that particular time, in addition to working in the pit, I was the elected compensation secretary of the particular colliery in which I worked, Wontaru Colliery. Incidentally, I was also the elected officer to deal with disputes at the colliery.
What was the name of the pit you were at? Was it all for 31 years at one or more pits?
Well, I worked at one pit for about a year, and then I worked at the other one for 30 years. The one I worked in for a year was called the Faldai pit. And
what area of Wales was that in?
That's in the Garw Valley. And the place where I worked for 30 years was Wontaru Colliery.
Is that in the same area?
Yes,
The
same
Garrow.
area. Yes.
The Garrow is to the west of
To the
here?
west, yes.
It's anthracite or is it bituminous?
No, bituminous.
Bituminous.
Yeah. And I worked in Wontaro, as I say, for 30 years.
What size pit was that, the number of men generally in the...
At that time, when I went into Wontaro pit, it was just under 1,000. But when I came out, because of contraction in the industry generally, there were about 400 men working in the pit. At the present moment, it's one of those that has been diminished to something like 230 men. And indeed, it's in jeopardy at this particular moment, and we're fearful that the colliery may close altogether very shortly.
Do I interrupt you with questions too much
Not at
to
all.
get your
Not at all.
background?
No.
I would appreciate it for this reason. One of the problems in the United Mine Workers that an outsider sees, I'm not a dues-paying member,
Yeah.
is that the many years of domination and benevolent, if you care to use the term dictatorship, and then later what would be regarded as less than benevolent, led to a serious decline in many observers' view of an educated, thoughtful, reading rank and file that we had earlier in the bitter and militant and bloody struggles which went on.
Yeah.
As a result, the reason I ask you your background, even the present upheaval and revolt has brought to the fore not only 3 elected national offices, but probably 30 to 50 university graduates in law and other fields to fill the kinds of positions you're talking about. You follow me?
Yes.
Would I understand that you would need in any of these positions you've described university graduates, or are you able to use rank and filers who have developed themselves like yourself for finance and safety as well?
Yes, we're allowed to use them provided they retain their membership of the miners' union.
Mm-hmm.
They must be members of the miners' union. We only make our appointments or our elections from members of the miners'
Then
union.
you would not be in the position or would follow in any way what I've described as this bringing in of like outside lawyers for appointment or outside university
No,
graduates
no,
into
we,
the South Wales.
No.
That
No,
we-
what we do when we need expert medical or, if you like, legal
Yes.
advice, then we pay for it.
Right.
We appoint solicitors like we have already here,
That's
and
understandable.
we pay for them. Now,
Right.
when we want doctors to help us,
Yeah.
particularly when we're in conflict with the ministry or in conflict perhaps with insurance companies, we then apply for and pay for the services of...
But no full-time appointed or appointed is what we're talking about now. The elected men are all rank and file or members. But no appointed officer, so far as you know, would be an outsider in this sense.
No.
Brought in
No.
from.
We simply employ these outsiders as advisors.
That's
They
right.
are not
Consultants,
appointed.
sure. We do
Consultants,
that,
sure.
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for this interruption. Then when did you accept this office after 31 years in the mines? When did you accept appointment by the Executive Council in South
Well,
Wales?
I came up through the ranks, as it were. While I was still employed in the pit, I was elected as a compensation secretary and the disputes agent, and I served in that capacity while still working in the pit for 21 years. At the end of 21 years, I was then appointed as the area compensation secretary. Not the South Wales area, it was an area within an area. Perhaps I should call it district. It'll be easier for you to understand. So at the end of 21 years, being a lodge official, because that's what you call them at the colliery, being a lodge official, I then became a district official, full-time for the first time. And that was in 1961. In 1969, I was appointed to the head of the department, and of course I'm still in that position now. And I deal with all matters pertaining to accidents. I negotiate for the men in matters of damages at common law. For instance, last year I negotiated £600,000 for men who were injured in the pit in 1 year.
You're allowed to go to common law in addition
Yes.
to the industrial
True.
accident
Yes.
portions of regulations.
Yes. We're obliged to contest cases in tribunals, that is local appeal tribunals, medical appeal tribunals, and we deal with matters of death from industrial disease or accidents. We deal with matters of pension, and we help generally, because I think it's right to say that the Miners' Union, particularly here in South Wales, is more of an institution than it is a union, because it's...
Tell me what you mean by that, Mr.
Yes.
Davis.
Well, I mean that we don't confine our activities simply and solely to matters in the collieries or in the industry. We get all sorts of people coming here and asking for advice. All sorts of social insurance kind of advice for people who don't work in the industry. But this is the sort of community that we have built up in the valleys, you see, where the union has become a sort of...
Ombudsman and
that's, I call them ombudsman, yes. And so we help in every way we possibly can.
What sort of staff, now that you are full-time responsible for this whole South Wales area, do you have working under you, with you, and are any of them expert in any of the particular areas, like in pensions more than in compensation, or are they all generalists?
But at the present moment in this department, because of the contraction that has taken place in our industry over the last 10 or 12 years, where you probably know we've been reduced from a total manpower in South Wales of 112,000 to 30,000.
When was it 112,000?
Well, I would say about 12 years ago, 12 or 15 years ago,
Okay.
Speaking from memory. Now we're now down to 30,000. But because of this contraction, there has, of course, been a contraction in the department. At the present moment, we have an agent who deals with compensation matters in Swansea. That's the western part of the area. I deal with matters here, and I'm assisted by an officer who is stationed here in this office. He helps me. And I have 4 girls who work in the department here.
The girls serve as secretaries and sometimes more. They can do some advising on matters on miners.
Yes.
Do miners, their widows, or other such people come into this office very much? Would you
Indeed they do, oh yes.
What size traffic, if you had to estimate in a week?
They come all sorts of times. We get when anyone is in trouble, we like to think they always come here, and they do come here. So to talk about the traffic coming here is very difficult. If you were here for much longer, you'll probably see
the interruption
people coming in. Yes, although we try to ask them to come by appointment.
Mr. Williams promised to get me a poster I was so impressed with at Mountain Ash. It was, you had a lot of large posters up, in the buildings.
Yeah.
This one was signed, I think, by Di Francis at the bottom. And it told the widows something about coming in for their coal allowance.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And I said, I'd be grateful. He said, there are plenty of posters, in our headquarters for education.
Oh, yes.
I said, I'd be grateful to take some back because it would be educational. This is the kind of thing the widows often talk about, the older men talk about, but it's never been won in our country. We've won all these things and other things, but, it would be good to exchange back and forth where we've achieved something like that.
I'll get them for you. But I understand you wanted to talk about pneumoconiosis.
Yes.
I wanted to tell you, because I'm particularly interested in what you've told me about the position that obtains in your country. Here in Britain, we've got a different setup entirely. First of all, on the diagnosis of pneumoconiosis. Now, prior to 1943, the only chest disease that was compensatable was silicosis. In 1943, silicosis was extended to other dusts, such as coal dust, anthracosis, bisonosis, asbestosis, breakliner dust, and the one term pneumoconiosis was for the first time introduced, and other dusts apart from silica dust, or the effects of them, became compensatable. 1943. Now, the union has got certain complaints regarding the diagnosis of pneumoconiosis.
What are those? I'd like you to...
Well, now, the diagnosis of pneumoconiosis is now being determined for us by the ILO. The ILO is the International Labour Organization.
You're going to discuss their categories, for instance. We happen to use the ILO category 1, 2, 3. Is that the type of thing?
That's the type.
Yeah,
of thing.
we have had to adopt them, and they're used for the living miner.
That's
you
it.
see.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in your comments.
Well, now we've adopted them too, but we are damned unhappy about them, and I'll tell you why.
All right.
Now, the diagnosis now, for compensation purposes, is that there must be fibrosis of the lung. There must be scratching of the lung, as we call it. Unless there is fibrosis or scratching of the lung, there is no compensation. And we are unhappy about it because we are constantly told by the pneumoconiosis panel that our members are suffering from dust retention. There are nodules and presence of dust in the lungs that will be there permanently. But there's no compensation for it because there's been no fibrosis of the lungs. There's been no scratching of the lungs. Now, we believe as a miners' union that dust retention should be brought within the diagnosis of pneumoconiosis and made compensatable. That's the first thing that we think is needed in the change here.
Back on.
We were discussing the diagnosis of pneumoconiosis. Well, the union believes that dust retention should be brought within the diagnosis. We are particularly concerned here when death occurs. We are very unhappy with the position when men who die from who are suffering with pneumoconiosis during lifetime, and then whose deaths are declared not to be due to pneumoconiosis. Now, we may be interested to know, in 1948 we changed the law. Prior to 1948, it was the Workmen's Compensation Act which applied, and under that act we were obliged to prove the causation of death by pneumoconiosis. In other words, we were obliged to prove that the death was specifically caused by pneumoconiosis. And we were unhappy about that because we were always finding that while the man had pneumoconiosis, the actual cause of death was due to something else. So in 1948, with the Labour government in power, we changed the Workmen's Compensation Act and we brought in the National Insurance Act. Now, under the National Insurance Act, that which was a part of the welfare state, there was another act called the Industrial Injuries Act, and pneumoconiosis is compensated under the Industrial Injuries Act. Now, the criteria for death under the Industrial Injuries Act is quite different to the criteria under the Workmen's Compensation Act. Under the Industrial Injuries Act, we are not obliged to prove causation of death by pneumoconiosis. What we are obliged to prove is that the death was materially accelerated by pneumoconiosis, which is a very different thing. Now, despite this change in the law, we are most unhappy in the union because things are not panning out as we envisaged when we changed that law. And we are finding, you may find it very difficult to believe.
I can.
You
All
may-
right to do so? I can, yes.
You may find it very difficult to believe that while we affected that change, we are still finding that men are declared to be suffering from pneumoconiosis for long periods during their lifetime to the degree of 100%, and when they die, despite that situation, we are finding that death was not materially accelerated by pneumoconiosis. And
They
this-
had 100%.
yes,
Was
indeed.
this due to, say, pneumoconiosis 30%, bronchitis 20%, a series of chest? percentages?
Possibly, sometimes it is 100% pneumoconiosis.
Is that right?
Sometimes, yes, indeed.
Oh, this is
Sometimes
amazing.
there are other things as well. Well, now, what surprises us is that in these cases, although the death has been due to a chest or heart ailment, we are finding that the pneumoconiosis, despite the degree of 100%, has played no part in the acceleration of death. And this is something which we cannot accept.
This is due to the physician panel's findings?
Yes.
Is that what you must oppose in
Yes.
every time? Okay.
It is the panel who makes these decisions.
Pneumoconiosis medical panel.
Yes.
That's what-
And this pneumoconiosis panel is comprised of 7 highly qualified experts in chest diseases. And we think that these decisions are completely logical. And it constitutes, as far as we are concerned here, a festering sore. Every one of our conferences, we get this brought up. Because you may know that the decision, whether the death was accelerated or not, means the difference to our widows between a decent existence and semi-destitution. And this is why we are so concerned about the matter. If the widow is found to be the widow of a man who's died from natural causes, the benefit she gets barely represents a decent existence.
Yes.
It is damn close to the poverty line. But if the death is declared to be due to pneumoconiosis, she gets different benefits that amount, I suppose, to a reasonable existence. And we are most concerned with these decisions because of this terrible effect that they're having on so many of our widows. Because one thing I think you ought to know is that even with this situation, 1 man a day is declared to have died from pneumoconiosis. Now we think that for every one that's declared as having died from pneumoconiosis,
Those statistics are great, throughout Great Britain or in Wales? What do you mean?
Great Britain. Great
Yes.
Britain. And for every, we think, or we're confident, I'm confident, because I deal with this every day here, that for every one that's declared to be due to pneumoconiosis, 4 or 5 are declared not to be due, and we think that these declarations are wrong. We think that those people who had this burden of pneumoconiosis and carried it for long periods of their life, that it must logically have affected their death. And we are damned unhappy about this situation. We want it changed. Now, the union policy on it is this. We haven't got the position that you previously described to me about presumption. But what we're asking for is this, that when a man has been certified in lifetime by the pneumoconiosis panel as suffering from pneumoconiosis to a moderate degree, and who then dies from a chest or heart ailment, that it should be accepted without the ritual of a post-mortem.
This
And
is
we
an
think it's-
excellent explanation, Mr. Davis, and let me assure you that, especially if you can give me a letterhead or something so I can be sure of getting you the right materials at your address, that the U.S. legislation, where it generally has what I call a lag of 30 years behind you, in this respect leaped forward.
You're in front of us, yeah.
And we would be more than happy to be sure to place this in your hands for whatever use could be made of it.
We're very grateful to you. Very grateful to you. I noticed you said that you have had Professor Goff in your country.
Yes, we have.
Now, we have a great admiration for Professor Goff. He's done a lot of work in this field here. He headed the Landoc pneumoconiosis research unit for a very long time. He did yeoman work there.
You were a local union officer, and may I ask you the other side of the coin? I also spent some hours with Dr. T.H. Jenkins, who was the first, who was both, he went to work in the mines at 14, then became a mining engineer, and then became a physician. A remarkable...
Yes, I know him well.
You know him well.
Yeah.
They both appear to me, and you please correct me to the extent that I have a wrong impression here, as the kind of, whether you agree or disagree on a particular matter with them, as humanitarian and decent kinds of specialized consultants that in many ways are scarcer in our country to come by, either due to class prejudice or more especially because we almost never have this career background. Dr. Goff was born in Mountain Ash, influenced by a mining community. Dr. Jenkins went to work in the mines, and then later. We are more apt to have physicians who arise only from the upper classes, don't even come out of Appalachia.
No.
If they do, there is a lack of class consciousness. Let me give you an example. In the counties around me, I have never, in the last 2 decades of group practice, been able to recruit a single miner's son or daughter who secured an MD to return to serve their people on a salaried basis. Their attitude in almost every case, one form or another, is, I want to leave all that behind. Now I want to make my pile, in the big city.
Now, you're raising a very interesting point. Now, I think the reason why we've been able, from the working class, to produce men like this is largely due to the form of community that we have created in the valleys. Now, in our valleys, every valley has a miners' institute of very long standing. And in these institutes, we've had debating societies where men have been able to educate themselves. Then we've had funds where we've sent promising youngsters who perhaps to work in the pit, like Nyrin Bevan, Jim Griffiths, people like this, all men who worked in the pit. Now, if they show promise, we then have a college that we finance ourselves, and we send our men to this college.
Now, when you say you have a college, would you tell me more about that? What is the college? Where is it? And how do you...
Yes, now the college that we have at the present moment, and I'm not saying the miners have it, we are simply part of it. Other workers are involved as well. Is Coleg Harlech. Coleg Harlech. And it's situated...
spell it maybe?
Yes, I will. It's a Welsh name. College is a colleague is hard. Showed me college, of course, but it is a Welsh name. So it's colleague, and you spell colleague C-O-L-E-G, and Harlech, and it's called Harlech because that's the name of the town. It's in North Wales, and Harlech is spelled H-A-R-L-E-C-H, Colleague Harlech. Now in Colleague Harlech, workmen go along there, workmen who have shown promise, either from the pits or the factories, and they are educated there at the expense of the other workers. And then we like to put these people with this class consciousness into positions. But I want to make this perfectly clear to you, that when you put men with the correct class consciousness into positions, we find that they are hamstrung by legislation that's not defined by the workers. It's defined by the Tory class, by the upper classes. Now that legislation, however good our people are, and whatever class consciousness they've got, it's very difficult to legislate or operate under the kind of law that we have. They are confined to the law that's operative on that particular thing. And this is where we are seeing difficulties in this field of pneumoconiosis. Whatever our people think in here, they have to operate the law. And the law says, as far as pneumoconiosis is concerned, that the man has to have fibrosis of the lungs.
Yes.
And that's
I'm
potentially
staying
helpful.
with you, and this is very helpful to me because I also agree with what you say of a sense of community that's been developed here, so that it's beyond, perhaps I'm wrong on this, and you can correct me, a class consciousness necessarily in a Marxist sense, as much as a proximate kind of thing of a love of the people with whom you were raised, or something that you don't lose. They both are combined in some way. Maybe your Welsh national spirit adds to that, and language, although I'm sure similar devices must exist in Scotland and in other areas, if not to this extent.
I agree, not to this extent. But
This is the greatest extent I'm seeing.
But basically, yes, Marxism comes into this. There's teachings of Marxism. There's other things as well. But basically, we expect these people to have an appreciation
Yes,
of the position from whence they came.
yes,
And these valleys know all about poverty.
yes.
They know all about the need
Yes.
to raise the standard of living. And what we like our people to think when we put them in these positions is that they don't forget.
This is a beautiful presentation. This, of course, we cannot do much to correct in our country, as you know, because it's maybe it's a failure on the part of labor leadership, a failure in so many respects, that there is not very often the most common thing is to stand on the shoulders of those from whence you came and rise to some new rung and ladder and drive the biggest car and get out of poverty and get out of mining and get away from Appalachia or whatever. I'm finding this very fascinating, and I wanted to also get your comments on some other areas, if I can, during the time I'm with you.
Could I say this one thing on pneumoconiosis before you leave pneumoconiosis?
Yes.
Because my union believes, that in addition to dust effects, there should be a financial recognition of other chest diseases. We believe that the diagnosis of pneumoconiosis should be extended so as to cover such diseases as chronic bronchitis, emphysema, both types of emphysema. And we believe that the working conditions that prevail below ground are most conducive to the contraction of these other diseases, particularly chronic bronchitis. And we would like to see chronic bronchitis made compensatable, brought within the diagnosis of pneumoconiosis. We are campaigning for that on the political field and have been for some considerable time.
You're going to have problems as long as you don't secure the coalitions necessary, I assume, to return a Labour government. It is not that easy to put it over with the Tories in power. Is that true or not?
Perfectly correct there. We don't expect any concessions from a Tory government. I think Churchill made this clear a long time ago. The Tory party stands for the rich, is a party of the rich and for the rich. So we wouldn't expect concessions from them. But it's right and proper for me to tell you that we are most disappointed with what we've had from Labour governments. Most disappointed. We would have thought that a government that wishes to call itself a social, or a party that wishes to call itself a socialist party, would have a greater understanding of socialism than what they have apparently had.
Right. And then, of course, we're probably unable to cover at the length that would be desirable the whole question of the energy crisis and problem as probably a Labour government might have seen more sympathetically the employment in coal and the closing of pits and some of these things over the period.
You're opening a new field. Yes, we are so about it. I told you just now that the mining industry have contracted drastically over the years, and it's been supplanted to a large extent by oil, to a lesser extent by nuclear energy, by North Sea gas. But now, what is very important at this moment is that there's now a fresh realization that this country needs coal. Just last year there was a coal strike here, and it almost brought the government down. It brought a national crisis, and it must be something to do with that. So there's an understanding now that coal is important. It is our only energy agent. It was our only energy agent for a very long time. And coal is still needed in this country, and I think the wheel is beginning to turn, where we might find now an extension of coal mining rather than retraction as we've had over the years.
I would hope too that through informal as well as formal means, more dialogue than has existed up to now should take place. You probably are in good touch to some extent with the European miners' unions.
Yeah.
The UMWA has had some of the snobbery, say, of the American, capitalist class generally, so that it's been difficult, despite the colorful leadership of Lewis over the years, in previous years, to really get any feeling. And I know that Mr. Lewis deferred on so many matters to simply reactionary political positions that were unimportant to him, red baiting or something like that, in your international. What I'm more concerned with are the bread and butter issues. I'm a practical man, and as I assume you are.
Yeah.
What I'm more concerned with is simple things like that the Middle Eastern oil interests are gaining a leverage even on the capitalist classes of both America and England. They're soon going to have billions of pounds and dollars on deposit to manipulate our markets, our production, everything here, while coal gets neglected. Now this is something I think, enormous coalitions could be put together in both our countries on.
But aren't you forgetting one thing? I appreciate what you say to be correct, but you must also understand that there is action taking place in the oil-bearing countries, action from the working class, which may result in oil not being so economically produced as previously. And if it's not as economically produced, it will not be
You're
the
more aware of this, obviously.
Yeah, Glenn, I wrote a letter yesterday on it. Go to meet this gentleman. This is the president.
Davis, Mr. Williams, was telling me about the comparable problems in pneumoconiosis and the kinds of changes that you'd like to see here, the inclusion of bronchitis, emphysema, and then the procedure. In turn, I was telling him that while we've generally had, say, a 30-year lag in social legislation behind Britain, politics is a strange thing. And 7 miles from where I live, in November 1968, the Farmington No. 9 mine blew up and entombed 78 men. It was the last big explosion in our country and perhaps in the Western, mining world. And it was dramatic because for the first time TV cameras like BBC stayed there for 10 days, and they were unable to seal the mine. There were thousands of relatives, etc. It became a complex political phenomenon, so it kept exploding, stayed on TV every day until it became clear we were going to, as a result of these victims, we could about do what we pleased politically. You follow me? It was a strange thing. It was Nixon coming into power in '69, but it was clear we were going to be able to do something with black lung now. As a result of that, the black lung legislation we got allows zero compensation if a man continues to work, unlike your 10% allowance for, simple pneumonia and so on. But we got in with Dr. Goff's help. The clinic where I am, we sponsored Dr. Goff, the board.
Yes.
And we brought him to our country, and he was a magnificent witness against the AMA, Medical Association doctors and all. And what we contended for was a presumption that if a miner worked 15 years underground, it would be presumed that any chest condition whatever would be defined as compensable pneumoconiosis, coal workers pneumoconiosis. Now, it's a very parallel kind of argument, okay?
Yes.
Now, we lost that presumption clause for living miners, but we won it under the federal, the congressional law, for a deceased miner. The result, to give you a quick example, is this. A miner may have had category 1 or no pneumoconiosis all of his life. He may have been denied anything he ever applied for, and he dies. If I, as the administrator of a clinic, can find any particle of record, and we have clerks and ex-miners all over the place looking for this through tens of thousands of records. If, for instance, 20 years earlier he walked in one morning and saw a doctor, and the doctor's note says, Mr. So-and-so complained of a cough when he awakens in the morning,
Yes.
that's sufficient.
Yeah.
The cough in the morning in 1952 will get the widow full black lung benefits in 1973.
No post-mortem.
Yeah. No, it's a presumption.
Blocking his strategy.
Yeah.
Very good. Well,
Mr.
we'll have a shot
Williams,
again.
Very nice to you. Thank you.
All the best.
Mr.
Williams is,
What is his first name compared to Emerlin as the vice president?
this is Glenn,
Glenn.
G-L-Y-N.
G-L-Y.
Okay,
I will get out of your way. I want to leave a few things with you, if I may. And if you can turn me over to a smart secretary or someone on your staff for the posters or things that I can show our people. For instance, the National Union said that they don't even have much in the... Let me leave you some additional reprints here.
Yes, if you would.
If you can use them for your... I especially would like... These are additional ones of what I gave you, okay, of the two cells.
Right.
Then this I don't know whether you'd like. Let
Yes,
me
I
just
would.
leave. Let me just show you what it is so you understand its bias. It is issued by the Department of Occupational Health, Dr. Kerr, of the United Mineworkers. Under the introduction is by Boyle, who's out, okay?
Yes, I know, yeah.
All right. But the only reason I leave it with you is not because of that introduction. It has the Kerr paper, which you will find elementary. Then it has Dr. Goff's testimony, give you some feel of a quick summary. And then they reproduced what normally appears only in unions usually don't issue this kind of expensive color plates. For whatever it's worth, okay? It's a bias of the old leadership,
Very
the
interesting.
young guys.
Yeah.
Let me leave these with you, and any of these articles I would like your criticism or comments on. What's different in Wales? You and your colleagues here, Mr. Di Francis, whom I did not get to meet, and I regret.
I'll write you anyway. Now, let me see if I can find something for you.
Now, I'm going to mail you, in the National Union, Mr. Mark Buick.
Adam do it, yeah.
Yeah, Adam Buick.
Yeah.
Have you seen this paper he
Yes,
prepared?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Well, I didn't know, and I didn't know whether you had any. This is the position you would take on these matters. This would represent the more advanced view of evidence
Yes, that's
on
right,
this.
Because what has I been prepared for? What I didn't tell you, what I think you ought to know, is very important now because there's going to be a lot of publicity to it. We talked about what was compensatable under the Acts. But now what we are trying to do now in this country is claim damages
Under common law, damages under common
Under
law?
common law.
Yes.
Now, while damages has been paid,
Mm-hmm.
we've never had case law. We've never had a case settled for us by a judge. So that's what we've proceeded to do now. We've got, here in South Wales, I've issued 800 writs. 800 writs.
Now, you have no bar like we do. If there's a workman compensation law in the States, then you're barred from common law. Have you managed to evade this?
Yeah, we had that.
I also noticed, Mr. Davis, your library is full of legal volumes and all. You have trained yourself a great deal in
common law,
in a lay way to present the evidence and so forth.
We find that we know.
I know I did this in arbitrations and all this, but you have much more detailed legal citation material here than our normal people do.
Cases, we've got all case law here.
Yeah, right.
That I can refer to. Now we found that by talking to court board,
Yeah,
the chap who opposes me in the court,
Yes.
the opposite number there,
yeah.
he's a military man. No legal.
Really?
Military
Isn't
man.
that, why is he illegal? The operators retain him, or who does?
Yes,
retain
the
him?
court board.
The coal board.
The court board.
Why do they like military?
Well,
you know?
no, that's debatable.
Okay.
I think that they'd like to introduce some discipline to things, and they look at the man with sometimes a dominating character, one who can dominate another. That's how I feel about it.
Could I arrange, since we don't have much time now, to send you periodically from the States publications that might be of interest to you? And as I see the things you have here, can I at least ask you about them when they're either available through you or for purchase, or whatever?
Now, tell me, where you staying now?
I'm at the Queen's Hotel in Cardiff until Sunday.
Till next Sunday.
Only 2 more. And it's for one of your bank holidays.
And then you're going back to States?
I'm going back to London until Wednesday, when I must go to France and then go back to the States.
Now, if I collect some stuff here for you,
Yeah.
where can I get you? Where could I send it?
You could mail it to me directly.
Give me-
Now, let me explain. I love labor history as well, and I would love to pay for any part of it that is for sale. Like if you have histories for sale of your union, I would be happy to do so. And I have, if you're interested, I think as a person who's interested in labor history, if you would like, I could would be happy to purchase from our publishers, like in the West Virginia University, some of the bloody recent history of violence in the building of the mine workers in Appalachia. If you like that type of thing, pictures of the police right on up to modern times, compared to Chartist times, in your land.
Indeed I would.
And I would be happy. These are not publications, they only print a few hundred, in our local libraries sometimes.
I'd be very grateful to you. Very grateful.
But what I would love to exchange with you, if I could, is I understand there's a good history of South